So let me welcome us to Masters with Masters. This is an event that brings together master practitioners and leaders who share their experiences, lessons, and thoughts pertaining to challenges and opportunities around space. We're here at the 2011 International Astronautical Congress in Cape Town. We're very pleased to have two leaders who have been committed to space as well as to extending the benefits of space to Africa. And want to thank both of you. I'll start by introducing Dr. Adigun Abiodun, who is the former chairman of the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. Began his career more than 40 years ago as a civil engineer and has held a variety of space program leadership, management, and teaching positions during a distinguished career. He's the founder of the African Space Foundation and still serves in this capacity, and is also an advisor to the Nigerian delegation to the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. And I want to thank you and welcome you to Masters with Masters. We also have with us Dr. Peter Martinez, who is the division head for space science and technology at the South African Astronomical Observatory, a facility of the National Research Foundation. He's also served for many years as a member of South Africa's delegation to the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, and currently chairs the committee's working group on the long-term sustainability of outer space activities. He's also been the chairman of the South African Council for Space Affairs, the national regulator for space activities, and has been very, very busy, obviously, over the last year, setting up the Congress that we're having. So welcome and thank you, Peter, as well. You started in civil engineering. What got you interested in going into space? And how's that journey proceeded?
Okay, you've asked a question that requires a long story, but I'm going to try and make it short. I came to the United States in 1962. I went to the University of Washington, and in my last year, or second to the last year, I don't remember which one, you had to take an elective called, several electives. Two of them were electrical engineering for civil engineers, mechanical engineering for civil engineers. And I discovered that I just enjoyed doing fluid mechanics. And with fluid mechanics, I also liked hydraulics and hydrology in my undergraduate year. So I was in the United States at a time when Boeing, the same Boeing company, was trying to diversify the population of its staff. So they came to Seattle and had a job mart. And unlike today, the jobs were plentiful then just for the asking. So a friend of mine and myself and several others, we showed up there. And we had a form just like this on the paper. They asked us to fill the form, so we filled the forms, the education we were getting, and so on and so forth. And the following week, I got a telephone call from the hydraulic system department of Boeing. And they asked me to come. And I got there, and all we were talking about was my salary. And I said, wow, this is good. And it was $750 a month. That was a lot of money then, you know. And so that was the beginning. And I finished there, and I went back to Nigeria then I went in and out of Boeing 3 times from 1966 to 1971. And I finally finished my doctorate at the University of Washington. I went back to Nigeria, started as a hydraulic and hydrology teacher at the University of Ife. And lo and behold, one of our professors was familiar with Landsat and had asked the university to write a proposal to be submitted to NASA on behalf of Nigeria. So my university put that together, and then they were shopping for the right people to put this proposal together, and I was the only one who knew anything about water. So they asked me to come and write, what will satellite do for water resources of Nigeria? And I put it together, along with others. They submitted that proposal to NASA. NASA granted it. And I think a week after we submitted that proposal, lo and behold, I came to my office and there was a paper from the United Nations, the first United Nations training course on remote sensing application to natural resources. to be organized in Tarbes, France. And all the French I studied, just basically getting through technical French. I debated, okay, I will go. So I applied, and lo and behold, the UN said, welcome. So I ended up in Tarbes, France for 6 weeks with little French, but I don't know how I met him, but he was giving me all the lessons. At the end of the 6 weeks, I was so excited, like I was just like a baby of 2 years of age. I wanted to know everything about space. So, and I finished and I went back to the UNESCO Office of Hydrology in Paris. And there was one Mr. Vahug, I think a Norwegian or Swedish man. And I said, look, I just went through this education and it's not enough. I need to know more, and so on and so forth. And then he said, okay, here are 2 papers. National Research Council of Canada, I think an equivalent National Research Council of the United States. They offer postdoctorate research fellowships. I think Canada has one in CCRS, so look at it and apply. To cut a long story short, I applied, and Canada gave me the fellowship, and I ended up at CCRS for 15 or 16 months, and I finished my remote sensing education there and ended up with a document for Nigeria of what remote sensing can do for Nigeria. And then I went back to my university, and as soon as I got back to the university, the Minister of Foreign Affairs put my name forward, said now Nigeria can go to Kupus. Somebody knows something. And then they put us together, about 4 of us, and then we came to Geneva in, I think, April of 1976. And there were several agenda items, so I took one on, I don't remember the topic, but I spoke on it. And then when I finished, Professor Perek at lunchtime said, oh, can I see you, please? And I said, yeah, let's go have lunch. So we went to lunch. And that was the beginning of my being in the UN. He said, I want you at the UN, and I shook my head against it. And before I knew it, my ambassador was passing me the employment paper at the UN. And Nigeria seconded me to the UN for 2 years, and at the end of the first year, the UN wrote Nigeria, no, we withdraw the secondment, we want him to be a permanent staff. And that is...
So it was a path, yeah. But it seemingly you were following your passions and interests, so both
that was
universities and work, and then starting with the practical benefits of space from water for Nigeria.
Right.
A long journey. Peter, what was your spark or inspiration for getting involved in space, and maybe how did it impact the educational and career choices you had?
My original interest in space came from the Apollo program, really. I consider myself one of the products of Apollo. As a young child going to school in the United States, I was a very keen follower of the American space program. That was during the time after Apollo, of course, but of course the memory of Apollo was still very strong. Skylab, the years of Skylab and so on. So really very interested. There was a lot of excitement about the shuttle. You will recall that was the time that Gerard O'Neill and a group of physicists at Princeton were developing models for colonies in space. We were all going to be living in orbit in the mid-'80s. So it was a very exciting time. And I made up my mind there and then that I wanted to be a part of this. And then later on, found myself in South Africa and started studying physics and astronomy. Got involved in some space astronomy missions, and through that found out that the space arena is wider than just science and technology. There are policy and legal and other issues. And then started supporting my country in its delegation to the UN in Copuus, the committee that Ali was referring to. And I realized that South Africa could be a part of this global space endeavor. So I then went to ISU to broaden my space knowledge, and returned from ISU determined to start a space activity in the country. So that's broadly the path that I followed.
So, I mean, one of the things you point to is obviously aerospace is very demanding from a standpoint of competency, many disciplines of engineering, of science, but also of management and business and and politics, and so people go into different aspects. You mentioned, Peter, that you went to ISU as a student. I think you also were there as a professor teaching. What do you see as some of the key educational factors that need to be focused on for aerospace and from your experiences?
Well, I found that the interdisciplinary nature of the training at ISU was the thing that really helped me to take off in my career in space. The fact that in emerging space countries there is a need for people with this very broad general knowledge of space issues. It's not just about the technology. So that for me was a key factor.
Ada, you've been involved obviously a lot in the United Nations, focused in terms of founding the UN regional centers on space science and technology education in Africa. What do you see as some of the key educational goals and what's most important in terms of careers for aerospace?
Now, when I read about the United Nations, the UN has just adopted the United Nations Space Applications Program. And that program had only 2 agenda items. One was to keep decision makers in the developing countries aware of the value and role of space science and technology in development. And to back that up at the professional level, they were providing training programs. And were conducting 2 or 3 programs a year. And by the time I became the UN expert on space applications in 1981, maybe we were conducting about 4 training programs, but everything was training programs, and mostly 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But there were so many drawbacks to that. One is the fact that most of the people we were training, once they get back home, they ran into trouble because most of their countries were not familiar with computers, were not familiar with image processing facilities, and therefore these people were getting nowhere to continue with what they've been exposed to. Secondly, the education itself was shallow. It was not deep enough. And third, and I'm of the view that training complements education. But most people believe, or not most people, a number of people believe that education and training are the same. And definitely, for me, they are not. You train a person to make use of the knowledge and skills that have been developed by somebody else. Whereas you educate a person to be a thinker and to evolve concepts and technologies that can be that can go in many directions. And so I was very interested in education. And then I started asking myself, okay, you are now the UN expert on space applications. I was talking to myself in my office. Now you are going to be you are now, not going to be, you are now the UN expert on space applications. When you leave this office, what's your legacy? Just be training people? So myself and my colleagues, we went through almost a whole month of brainstorming among ourselves, and it was good. Finally, we concluded we need to go out and talk to the countries and speak with them. So we organized 3 regional meetings globally, one in India in 1986, one in Mexico in 87, and one in Nigeria in 87 also. And then we ran the final meeting in Dundee, United Kingdom in 1989. And at the end of that meeting, the consensus was we need something better than what we are doing. And it has to be called long-term education at the regional level. And to cut a long story short, that was how we evolved the concept of the UN Regional Centers for Space Science and Technology Education. The problem we ran into immediately, of course, who's going to pay for it? Who's going to host the centers? How many centers are we going to put up? How are you going to locate the centers? And so on and so forth. So we went through again another series of steps, and we more or less did it like a bidding. And believe me, virtually every developing country was interested in hosting that center. Unfortunately, many of them believed the UN was going to bring the dollar bucket to support it. So well, that was not the case. Then the second thing was, what was going to be the curricula? And how many, what are the aspects of space science and technology you really want to focus on? So we then concluded that we're not going to focus on too many areas, the ones that are of most interest to the developing countries. Earth observation, that means remote sensing and satellite metrology, and then communication. And GNSS was not a factor at that time, but we had communications, and then we said basic space sciences. And then, unfortunately, I had a German colleague, some of you may know, Peter knows him, Dr. Hans Hobold from Germany. He's an astronomer. So he was, so I actually delegated him as my right-hand man for the centers and for the development of the thing. Then we now went around the world again one more time and went through about 3 or 4 meetings of developing the curricula for each of these disciplines, because we didn't want each center to develop its own curriculum. So we had a master curriculum that the UN said you must implement. So that was the end of it, and people came up with money to put up the centers. Eventually, we put the Asian Center in India, 2 centers in Africa, the English-speaking one in Nigeria, the French-speaking one in Morocco, and then Brazil and Mexico are co-hosting the one in Latin America. And the program of the center, instead of 2 weeks, is normally 9 months. No, 1 year. And then you come in, and it's broken down into a general program, like you go to an undergraduate school and you take general courses. And then towards the end, you select whether you want to be in communication or remote sensing or basic space science. But then at the end, you will not get a diploma from the center until you come back to your country and carry out an application project. You do that. But I must not forget to add that before we started these centers, the government of Sweden was totally helpful in giving us 12 years of what they call a pilot project for this activity, by giving us the opportunity to come to Sweden through the University of Stockholm and the Kiruna facilities to expose mostly teachers from the developing countries. We call them remote sensing education for educators. And we bring them to Sweden every year for 6 weeks. And the Swedish government paid all the costs at the local level. And the UN paid all the travel costs for these people. And normally about 27 to 30 teachers all over the year. So the program just wound up, I think, about 4 or 5 years ago. And it started in 1990. And it was a very, very effective and successful program. So with that, we believe we are developing the capabilities now that can help the developing countries. And we believe also that given the fact that the centers have been running now since 1995, 96, and they are still there, the centers collectively have educated more than 1,000 people globally. The Indian Center is the #1 center in terms of programs. In actual fact, we said that once you finish at the center, because we said each center must be affiliated with a local university, and the local university must ensure that the curriculum is in line with what is required of a university degree, so that in case the participant wanted to get a degree, they just need to go back to the university for 1 year or so, and they will get whatever degree they are qualified to get. And the one in India now, and that degree is equivalent to a master's degree. And now in India, they are even developing a PhD program through these centers right now. So it's been a very good program, far and wide. And also many of them are using the centers to popularize space in their respective country. For example, the World Space Week we are celebrating now, right. The center in Nigeria and I think the center in Morocco are the focal points for popularizing space during this week in those two countries. So this is what we're doing.
Yeah, so you wanted to, early on, have a commitment in terms of changing people's minds
right.
and concepts,
right.
not just training for a job.
No.
You've been in just your answers to many different countries. You've talked about Sweden and Germany and Nigeria and different locations. What do you see as the possibilities in terms of space for the collaboration, and what are the limitations of collaboration, particularly international collaboration?
Now, international collaboration starts from the United Nations. If you go to the UN space, not the space treaty itself, but you go to the resolution, the General Assembly resolution that established CUPOS in 1959. The mandate of CUPOS was to promote international cooperation. And that is the focus of the UN Committee on Outer Space. But the most important aspect of that mandate is the way member states decided the mandate will be implemented. And that is through consensus. And I think that committee, I may be wrong, but I think it is the only committee of the United Nations where there is no voting. Whereas in many other committees they vote, but there's no voting. And I think it's the best way, because CUPOS is a child of the Cold War. And I remember many times the United States would come up with a brilliant idea at CUPOS, and all this, Russia used to just turn its nose in the air, and vice versa. So, and therefore with that you don't go anywhere. But with consensus, I think, and with the Berlin Wall falling down again, that has helped. So international collaboration has been there. And when you look at international collaboration, what are you talking about? There are so many issues that no single country can address. Climate change is one. Peter is gradually becoming the father of what I call the sustainability of the outer space environment. He's our chairman of the working group. No country can take that on by itself. You have NEOs, that is near Earth objects, space debris. You have space weather problem with the solar flares and solar storms. These are not issues that affect only one country. They affect all of us all. Therefore, there's a need for collaboration to monitor the impact, or where it is possible to control or to divert the danger. You need international collaboration to accomplish this. And for me, the developing countries need to sit up and do some contribution. And I give Nigeria as a classical example. Last year, I think in January and March of last year, we almost lost Nigeria Sat-1 to 2 different space junks. Were it not for the U.S. Space Command that alerted Nigeria that your satellite is in danger to be hit by XYZ space junk. And with some information, a number of maneuvers were undertaken, and that was averted. So you need all of that. Then when you also look at collaboration at the regional level, you know that Africa has been a big beneficiary of United Nations efforts on space, because most of the things that are now maturing in Africa started way back in the 70s and 80s as a result of the United Nations and its sister agencies like WMO, FAO, ITU, coming on the ground in Africa to help. And then again, the latest one is the ALC, African Leadership Conference on Space Science and Technology. It is equally a baby of the United Nations. It was born here in South Africa on November 8, 1996, at a meeting we held in Pretoria at the second UN Conference on Space Science and Technology for Sustainable Development in Africa. So collaboration is a must, because we are all in it together, and no country can survive without it. But to make sure that collaboration succeeds, we also need competencies and capabilities, because when you say you are going to collaborate, it is not a technology transfer issue. It is an issue where everybody has to make a contribution. And to make a contribution and to be relevant and to be invited to the knowledge exchange table, each country must bring some knowledge to the table and some capacities and competencies and some funding. You cannot say everything has to be funded by somebody else, or Uncle Sam, or whatever.
Right.
Thank
So
you.
the issues of space put a focus on, obviously, the planet as a whole, and so anything that can be accomplished is the collaboration. Certainly you see that with the education. Peter, you spoke about, particularly as you were growing up, that you learned to have an interest and you wanted South Africa to be involved in space and to benefit from that. What do you see in the future in terms of collaborations for Africa as a whole, in terms of opportunities, benefits, ways of getting involved further in space? Do you have dreams or visions about where to go from here?
Yes, we all have dreams and visions in Africa on collaborating in space. Indeed, this was the theme for the fourth African Leadership Conference on Space Science and Technology for Sustainable Development, which took place in Mombasa last week. And indeed, it was the African Preparatory Conference for this IAC. There's great potential for cooperation in Africa. Many of the problems that we see in Africa are of a transfrontier nature, issues such as food security, or really food insecurity, water, energy, and so on. So these are issues that are of common concern to all African countries and provide a strong basis for cooperation in our various space activities. In concrete terms, one collaborative project that has already been initiated is a program called the African Resource Management Constellation, or ARMC for short. And the concept of the ARM program is that each country contributes one satellite towards the constellation, and that it has access to the data from the other satellites. This initiative is currently being led by Algeria, Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa. And we were all very excited when very recently Nigeria launched a satellite, which is its contribution to the ARM initiative. So that initiative is already beginning to be implemented. And it will provide a foundation for intra-African cooperation. Also in that regard, we see here within the context of this Congress and the IAF environment, there is a move within the International Astronautical Federation to establish an African forum of IAF member entities. We're all very interested and supportive in this, of course, and we're looking at ways that this can complement the ALC, which is the regional forum that Ade mentioned, but at the same time strengthen African participation in the IAF and the Astronautical Congress.
Wanted to shift maybe into the role of space, in Africa, and obviously South Africa has a national space agency, SANZA, and what, from your experiences, follow with you, what are some of the lessons that you feel South Africa can share in terms of getting there with other nations in Africa?
Well, I can relate our experiences in South Africa, and they may be of interest to other emerging African space nations. Space is very widely used in our country, and it is the case that when we began this process towards the establishment of a space agency, that the space activities were distributed in various pockets that were uncoordinated. And so it really began as a coordination exercise within government. We established a group of senior government civil servants from various different government departments. And the aim of this group was to try to emphasize the important role of space science and technology and meeting the mandates of these various departments. And these officials that participated in these early discussions became champions for space within their respective government departments. And so when we started talking about improving South African coordination of space activities, possibly moving in the direction of a space agency, we already had in place in government champions in the various government departments who could brief their political principals about the importance of space. And so that we found that this smoothed the way of promoting a space agency at a more political level.
Right. And obviously there are many needs and their interests, and there are also capabilities in different African nations. What do you see as the most compelling of those that drives an interest in moving out and participating in space?
I said some of this in Mombasa, and I think I've said a few here as well. The capabilities, the needs, and the compelling issues. I think I want to disabuse one factor. When we say a country is space capable, by my assessment, that country does not necessarily have to have a space asset. Because you don't need to have a communication satellite to use communication satellites to communicate. And you don't need to have an Earth observation satellite today to be able to use Earth observation data to manage your life support systems. And you don't need to send out what I call a GPS satellite to make use of GPS. They're all there. Today, Landsat 5, Spot, CBAS, even some of the Indian satellite data are available free. That's point number one. What I hope will happen as a result of Mombasa and as a result of this meeting here is that African countries that are interested in going to space will first of all identify why they want to go into space. And when I use the word going into space now, I don't mean going to space with a rocket or a satellite. Why they want to even look at space as a tool of development. And what aspect of the development exercise they want to address. Peter has mentioned some of these. Food security, health, education, safety in terms of floods. When there's flood in most societies, the victims are mostly the poor who have not made use of flood maps to locate where they're going to be so that when there is a flood, they don't get swept away, and so on and so forth. So they, first of all, identify what their needs are. There's plenty of data on the ground today, either from the old satellites or from the new satellites that African countries can use to better manage their societies. There's nothing more important than information. Information is a major infrastructure, such as like roads. You need information to build a road. You want to set up an electrical grid. You need information to set it up. You want to build a dam. You need information to set it up. And so on. You want to do farming. Africa today experiences, according to FAO, the largest deforestation in the world. And what does that mean? Expansion of the Sahara Desert to the south. You need satellite technology to monitor this encroachment of the desert to the south. So from this experience, you don't bring only your users in Earth observation, but to do the usage of that data, bring all your technicians, your computer scientists, your software developers. After X number of years of consciously and judiciously making use of this data, you are able to tell whether that Landsat data or that Nigeria Sat-1 data that is being acquired by satellite that you did not develop yourself is actually giving you the type of information you need or you don't need. And so in case you then need another satellite in the future, you can then modify the characteristics and specifications of your sensor systems and all other parameters that go on board the space payload, or the satellite payload. And so once you do that, in 5 to 10 years, you discover that these little technologies you use in an area of application can also become very relevant in many other aspects that have nothing to do with data analysis. And gradually, you have what I call local industries, because no African country can be successful in space without a successful private sector. And except for South Africa, today, I don't see any private sector that can support a space program that requires launching a satellite, developing this, developing that in any African country. But by starting from the usage, the electronics, the sensor systems, you build components that may even be used in other areas that have nothing to do with space. A classical example are the spin-offs from the US experience that I know of. For example, many astronauts died on the launching pad at the beginning of the human space flights. Outcome, today, you can go into any store and buy fire-retardant materials. Most firemen in the US, if they die at all fighting fire, it's not because their clothes have caught fire, because the clothes are now fire retardant. The same way, here in Africa, you can buy materials that dispel the rays of the sun and therefore make your house cooler as a result of the shielding of satellite instruments. So there's a lot to be learned from this experience, and my hope is that African countries will go that way. And to conclude on that, I will offer the Ghanaian model as an example. Ghana announced this June that they want to go into space, but they didn't say they are going to build a satellite yet. They gave the international community this information, and one, they've established a space center as of January 1 this year. And that space center is starting with 3 goals. One, they want to build a first-class telescope. And I said, wait a minute. I go back to Socrates. Socrates said that man must go above the earth and beyond in order to know the world in which you live. So that is great. Not only that, they will be able to see some of the space junks we are talking about and probably contribute to Africa's effort to mitigate the effect of space debris. Then they said they are going to build a planetarium and a science center, a science museum. And thirdly, they want to send their students and many professionals to pursue graduate education in space science and technology. For me, that is laying the foundation, and I love it.
So even though you're a profession in space, you're very grounded on Earth with practical and pragmatic benefits.
I think to answer that question just very briefly, we must recognize, especially in Africa, that it doesn't matter what you put in space. If it doesn't impact the people on Earth on the ground, it has no meaning. That is the bottom line.
Yeah, and so that's one of the questions often societies, the public will ask is, what's the benefit? Why should we invest in space? Because it does require a lot of money to do many of these things. It requires a knowledge and talent base, but that's part of the benefit, is the economic development, is the science, is the tools, and is the knowledge. Maybe I'll follow up with Peter. Do you have any thoughts on, again, the benefits or making that case for the importance of space to a society when there are many competing resource interests?
Sure. That's a challenge that we had in South Africa, of course. There's many, many very strong developmental issues that need to be addressed, and so therefore the case for space has to be articulated in a very, very clear and compelling way. The way we've done it is to make the point that space is what I call modern infrastructure. You know, just as the traditional infrastructure of roads, harbors, railways, bridges enabled the modern industrialized societies to develop and to become prosperous. In the 21st century, space technology is the infrastructure that underpins the information society. There is no country on Earth that is completely devoid of space technology. Every citizen makes use of space technology personally in some way or another every day. Cell phone technology is very widely used in Africa, ATM networks and so on. So the point we made was that space technology is part of the plumbing of everyday life. And once people make that connection, it becomes a lot easier to then raise in their minds the question of what would happen if we didn't have this technology in place. Those of us in the space community in South Africa, we often joke that we missed a golden opportunity to impress upon everyone exactly how important space technology is when we didn't switch off the satellite feed for the 90 minutes of the World Cup final last year. I think that would have sent a very clear message to everybody how important space technology is. But on a lighter note, I think there is now an appreciation of this importance of space as being a critical part of modern infrastructure. Of course, as with any other country and any space agency, we face issues of balance. How do you find the balance between applications and research, between industrial development versus just procuring systems on the open market? And of course, every country needs to decide for itself where the appropriate balance lies in these various areas. Currently in South Africa, our R&D expenditure is about 0.9% of the GDP, which is considerably lower than the OECD average of about 2.3%. This low level of investment is reflected in the significantly lower number of patents that are filed or research papers that are published compared to the OECD, and also is reflected in a much lower level of R&D investment by private industry in this country compared to, say, OECD partners. So it sends a clear message that we need to increase our investment in science and technology broadly, and of course that there's a knock-on effect in the space sector as well.
So both, to be a modern nation requires these technologies and the importance of building that in the knowledge base. I want to go to some questions we have from the audience, if that's good, and I'll start with Dr. Martinez. And the question goes, South Africa is putting up a lot of activities around astronomy. What is your vision for space science / astronomy in Africa in the next few decades? And how are you engaging the young people, the youths?
It's South Africa, in the early 2000s, South Africa identified astronomy as an area where we have geographic advantage in the sciences. Because of the distribution of the Earth's land masses and because of climatic conditions, it turns out that Southern Africa is a very good location on which to put telescopes. And so the first major international modern telescope project in South Africa began in the year 2000. It's the Southern African Large Telescope. It's an international partnership comprising South Africa as the leading partner, but with also partner institutions in the United States, United Kingdom, New Zealand, Poland, Germany, and India. And this led to the construction of this very successful telescope project, which created all sorts of human capital development opportunities to build up a more skilled workforce in science and technology. Building on the success of this then, South Africa was attracted to the Square Kilometre Array project, which is a project to build the world's largest radio telescope, which will have a collecting area of 1 square kilometre. And if one builds a radio telescope of those dimensions, you then need to find a very large expanse of radio quiet land, and such areas only exist in large unpopulated regions. So South Africa and Australia were shortlisted to host this, the SKA. The decision will be announced sometime in 2012. But just the mere fact that South Africa was shortlisted was enough to inspire our government to make very significant investments in the basic science and engineering disciplines that support ground-based astronomy, and to begin the development of a large telescope array that we call Meerkat, which is being built in the Northern Cape province of South Africa. And this will provide a major facility for African astronomers. I should say that all of our astronomy committee activities we see as initiatives that are open to collaboration with other African countries, and indeed we welcome our African colleagues to make use of these facilities and to collaborate with us in reaping their scientific benefits.
So there's obviously a lot that's happening there and moving forward.
Yep.
Is there any arrangement, is there any plan that some of the ideas, some of the recommendations, some of the dialogue that's happened at this event and at other conferences, that it gets to real policy makers and politicians, so that there's a follow-up, there's a benefit from it? Peter?
Yes, indeed. One of the sessions that we had at the Mombasa conference, which was the preparatory conference for this event, had to do with exactly that, how we make sure that the voice of the space community is heard in African political forums. And there was a Mombasa Declaration for Space and Africa's Development that was adopted, and which contains in it a number of recommendations that will be fed back to the African Union, and also a commitment by the space community to engage proactively with the African Union, because it's clear that the AU is taking decisions on matters pertaining to space affairs without really having the benefit of the input of Africa's space community. So yes, indeed, there is a strong commitment by the African space community to make sure that the visibility of space is enhanced at political level through events such as this conference.
Right. And obviously through the United Nations and your activities, it gets visibility, I would assume, there.
Yes.
Final question in terms of time. We've covered a lot of fascinating topics, and I appreciate it. It's been my pleasure to be a part of this. We've had obviously a lot of next generation leaders, young professionals at this. Based on your experiences and your long careers, what advice would you give to someone who is young, someone who is in Africa, and someone who is interested in a career in space?
Shall I start? Sure. You can? Okay. Let me just start. Okay. For me, my first 3 words will be go for it. That's what I would say. Go for it. That's number 1. Number 2 is the fact that I'll use myself as a classical example for myself when I talk to people. I came from a very rural village. My father founded the village. Everybody during his time, planted cocoa. And then I got to the United States, and I showed pictures of my father's farm, and with the cocoa, and people say, oh, this is Pennsylvania chocolate. I said, no way. This is from Abiodun, Nigeria, you know. Now, essentially what I'm saying is that some of us have been lucky, and I put myself in that category. I've been extraordinarily lucky, and I'm grateful to God. But I go back to the name of my ambassador in New York. His name is Onemola, or in a proper Yoruba name, Enimola. It means most Nigerian Yoruba names have meanings. And the actual complete name is Kosieni Tiomo Ola. Nobody knows tomorrow. So why do you want to limit yourself to what you have today? So my suggestion to the young generation, look ahead, don't look down. Focus in front, because you don't know what is going to come. Will there be jobs for me when I finish my space education? You don't know. When I started my own exposure to space, I was not even thinking of a career. I never thought I would leave Nigeria to work for anybody. And I've been all over the world. All because I've been lucky to be, quote unquote, in the right place at the right time, and people have helped me in the process. So if there's anybody, if you're interested, please, if your instinct talks to you like it talks to me, because I know that once I get away from my first instinct, I'm in trouble. So I always go for my first instinct, and I've always been right. If you're interested in space, go for it. Whether your country has a space program or not, don't let that be your deciding factor. The deciding factor is your interest, your capabilities, and the energy to pursue it. And may God help you out. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter?
Yes, well, I tend to share Ade's sentiments, which he has put very eloquently. I'm often asked to give talks to schools, and there's usually excitement in space, and the question of whether it's possible for an African child to pursue a career in space, whether there are even opportunities in Africa. And I always tell learners that their journey into space begins in the classroom, because it's so important that we often talk about the inspirational power of mathematics, of space, for boosting science and math education. And I make sure to underscore that message when I engage with learners in school. For slightly older folk in it's sort of university stage, my advice to them would be to learn from the best, find out, seek out the best and learn from them. Make use of networking opportunities such as this Congress, meet people, get to know them, and join the global network of space professionals, because it is a truism that it's not always what you know, but also who you know that can help you to develop your career in space. I completely agree with Ade in his remarks that if at first things don't seem to be going well, don't give up, keep trying. Don't be deterred by lack of activity in your own country. If there is no space program in your own country, keep at it, keep trying. You may well be the founding generation of space activity in your own country.
Exactly. That last point Peter made. When your country is ready to go into space, either because it has the money or it has the vision to go into space, if you are there, you'll be a part of it. But if you have given up because you have only been thinking of the currency side of it, rather than on the intellectual and the fun of it, you won't be part of it. So if they need you and you have the capabilities, you're there. I got in space because after I finished my research program in Canada, And Nigeria then said, okay, we have a few Nigerians that know anything about space. Let's send them to the UN for the KUPOS meeting. And I went to one KUPOS meeting, and the people running KUPOS said, no, you have to come to us. You are going to work for us. So you don't know the future. Only God knows. Thank you.
Yes. And I know it's been, for me, it's been an extraordinary hour. It's gone very, very quickly. I want to thank Dr. Adigun Abiodun and Dr. Peter Martinez. I know it's been a very busy week, but it's been a real pleasure the last hour. So thank you.